This is a video documentary about the life of a leader, Lee Kuan Yew. Lee Kuan Yew was Singapore's first Prime Minister after independence in 1965. He has been described as one of the legendary figures of Asia in the 20th and 21st centuries. Singapore, under the leadership of Lee Kuan Yew, has become a sovereign, democratic, and independent nation, founded upon the principles of liberty and justice, and even seeking the welfare and happiness of the people in a just and equal society. Some of the pillars you aspire to build are: 1. Becoming a leader. 2. Ensuring that his family's future was secure. 3. Stabilizing the society of Singapore. 4. Creating and maintaining a high standard of living, in other words, conversion from third world to first world. 5. Societal aspirations towards Chinese ideology. At the end of World War II, heads of the state sought to restore order and rebuild war-torn nations into free and open societies. They were also constantly opposing the ever-present threat of socialism. Heads of the state also had to win over a bitter enemy which comprised of a totally alien race, culture, language, and religion. It is within such circumstances of place, time, and uncertainty that Lee Kuan Yew emerged as the leader of Singapore. Lee Kuan Yew was adamant that his family should not suffer after his becoming Prime Minister, and this led to his determined efforts to this advancement of the country. He changed the education system so that as his son progressed, he would benefit and eventually become his successor. Singapore could not continue to survive on the colonial model as a helpless people dependent on larger, more advanced and more powerful nations. It was a third world country that had to abruptly change course with modern industrial economies on its own. His main ambition was to not only have a high standard of living, but also to maintain it. In order to realize this, leaders were instructed to lead in a manner that they would eventually result in Singapore's status as becoming a dynamic and developed country. His ultimate ambitions were not only for the people currently living in Singapore, but even more importantly for the sake of future generations. With a strong knowing of his heritage, Lee Kuan Yew imposed his philosophical ideals of Chinese supremacy. His desire to use Asian correctness was his motivation for moving Singapore forward. After seeing the inability of his grandchildren to speak his native mother tongue, he pushed for the speaking of Mandarin. Some hegemons and key attitudes emulated by Lee Kuan Yew: family, power, racial supremacy, society. Lee vicariously treated Singaporeans as an extension of his family. But there is also a sense in which he treated his family as a microcosm of the nation. This has involved a three-pronged approach. First, the relatively benign practice of using his family's experiences as a basis of public policy formation. Second, the more consequential practice of following national agendas that mold Singapore around his children's needs. Third, the practice of molding of his children and grandchildren so that they become the model of the new Singaporean. Between them, these three approaches have truly made Lee's family Singapore's first family in several senses of the expression. The innate and long-standing character of his Chinese suprematism has been indisputable since 2000, when it entered the public domain that in 1967 Lee had told a meeting of Singaporean university students in blunt terms that he believed Chinese are inherently superior to the other races in Singapore. He did so by telling the following parable in response to the question, quote, "What is the X factor in development? 3 women were brought to the Singapore General Hospital, each in the same condition, and each needing a blood transfusion. The first, a Southeast Asian, was given the transfusion but died a few hours later. The second, a South Asian, was also given a transfusion but died a few days later. The third, an East Asian, was given a transfusion and survived. That is the X factor in development." End quote. Read from No Island is a Man, The Enigma of Lee Kuan Yew's Legacy by Michael D. Barr. Some external challenges he faced were ignorant, primitive, and superstitious cultures that wanted to cling to a familiar past instead of building a dynamic future, rising racist sentiments among its scattered ethnic groups that frequently broke out into riots, being a tiny nation of 2 million people, it did not have the advantage of size, competing interests from neighboring nations, no state of natural resources to draw from, and national security. Interpreted through the eyes of different viewers, the nature of his impact can be viewed either negatively or positively. From a global perspective, outside of Singapore, he is considered to be a great leader of high standards. Lee Kuan Yew's ideology and methods of progression not only improved the sovereign state of Singapore, but influenced and inspired other nations which were striving towards development. However, inside of Singapore, some consider him to be an authoritarian, since he forced certain demands on the people despite it being a democratic sovereignty after 1965. One outstanding example of this was when Lee Kuan Yew insisted that the entire country become bilingual. He insisted that students in schools learn English. There are reports of how painful teachers found this to be. Meritocracy, which was one of his guiding principles, did not always find favor with the citizens, who viewed this as just another one of his authoritarian actions. Group reflection. We were able to pool our resources, and this led to cooperation, which in turn made our project easier for us to manage. We were able to share ideas and participate in critical thinking while sharing and appreciating the experience and expertise of each other. We were all inspired and motivated by this man, Lee Kuan Yew.